with the medical situation, so on station and shuttle, we have crew medical officers. And of course, you get a little bit more training on station because you're there. Shuttle, the paradigm was come home. But in any case, you learn how to stabilize someone in an emergency, because that's really the key, the airway, the breathing, the cardio. Are they breathe, and if they're having a heart attack, give them epinephrine and put on a defibrillator and some of these basic things. And you get practice with it. And they do a pretty good job of having you repeat that often. And I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier about the confidence to approach a system and not break it. Well, there's a certain amount of confidence you need to approach the human system and not break it. So having that hands-on experience is really important, I think, even though that it tends to, it feels like in training you're doing this all the time, but there's a good reason for doing this all the time. You don't really see a lot of common cold or flu or sniffles and things like that on orbit. You're in quarantine before you go, and if that's worked, you come up, you're pretty healthy. So the kinds of injuries or the kinds of health issues you see on orbit are, first of all, are you adapting to space? Different people adapt to space differently. Some people are nauseous, some people are dizzy, some people just their whole body just shuts down and they can't move around for a while as they readapt, but that passes. That's temporary, right? And then I mentioned this before, I worry about eye injuries. I think that's what we're really the most vulnerable to, because things are floating around and you can get things into your eyes very easily, which is why I wore glasses the whole time I was there, just to have an extra level of protection, because we don't think about that, because here it's not a big deal because everything falls to the ground. So your dinner's not floating around with you, or metal shards from a experiment or a stripped thread aren't floating around, or lint or dust or hair or whatever. It's all floating in the air with you. So you got to be careful. The other thing you can get are bruises and bumps just from bouncing around out of control if you're not careful where you go, or damage from tools, if you're trying to work with tools. So you can get little things like that. I pinched my finger in a piece of equipment and I still have some nail damage years later. That hurt. So there's little things like that can happen. So they're sort of percussion kinds of injuries, if you will. Everyone's screened so you don't expect to have heart problems. So that's really the one we train for the most. If there's any major, the paradigm with the station is, you stabilize them and then you would bring them home. So there's not a need to figure out how to do a major surgery like an appendicitis. We have to do appendicitis or things like that. So right now our paradigm is stabilize them, bring them home, and that's what we train for. People get headaches every now and then. You can take aspirin, and some of that's, we're finding that there's a wide variety of sensitivity to CO2 levels. So that really drives a lot of the headaches. So there's not a lot of stuff that happens medically on the station, but part of that is, because of the fact that you can go home and be on the ground in a couple hours if you stabilize a person. If you're going to live on the moon, or if you're going to an asteroid, if you're going to Mars, pick your location, you're now trapped in this tin can for a long period of time. And you have to think a little bit more carefully about what is your medical scenario. Either A, how you're going to screen people, or B, what kind of skill sets do you need to take care of what potentially could come up, and what is the risk of that? Because that puts the mission in jeopardy, let alone someone's life, but definitely the mission. So do you need a medical doctor? What kind of diagnostic equipment do you need? I think we're going to have to invest in a lot of non-invasive diagnostic equipment, and the level of that is probably dependent upon how skilled of a medical person you have on board. Do you need someone trained as a paramedic? Do you need a full doctor? Do you need a surgeon? Do you need a general practitioner? What kind of skill set do you need? And I don't know the answer to that, by the way, but I think it's something that has to be thought about. And how would you, if you had to do a surgery in space, if you had to take someone's appendix out, how would you do that? The way the body's going to react and the way that the blood is going to react is completely different without gravity. Do you spin your craft up to get some kind of a G to help you with the surgery, or do you figure out how to do zero G techniques? Or do you just take everybody's appendix out so you have to do an appendicitis? There's different ways to approach it. Preferably not the latter, because, that could be a problem too. But I think people need to think about that. And maybe the answer is you put a doctor on board, and then we learn something from that first mission, and then we alter the other scenarios after that.